There is someone in your life right now. Maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's a teacher. Maybe it's someone you love deeply, someone you've trusted for years. And something is wrong. You can feel it. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way you can easily explain to someone else. Just this quiet, persistent wrongness. Like every time you leave their presence, you're a little less yourself. Like every time you grow, something pulls you back. Like your light, the actual living light inside you, gets dimmer around them, not brighter. You've probably blamed yourself for that feeling. Most awakened people do. What if I told you that Mary Magdalene, not the sanitized stained glass version, not the weeping penitent kneeling at the feet of Christ, but the real Mary Magdalene, the one whose teachings were buried, burned, and systematically erased for nearly 2,000 years? What if I told you she had a name for what you're feeling? What if she didn't just name it, but mapped it? What if she left behind a complete set of signs, a way of recognizing exactly what kind of force is operating through certain people in your life? That's what this video is. And I want to be clear from the start, this is not beginner content. If you're here, you already know the basics. You already know that energy is real, that consciousness is layered, that not everything that looks like light is light. You don't need me to convince you of that. What you might need, what I think a lot of people at your level of awareness actually need, is precision. Not more spiritual concepts. Precision. The specific, detailed, almost surgical ability to recognize a particular kind of force when it's standing right in front of you, wearing a human face, maybe even telling you it loves you. Mary Magdalene had that precision. And the fact that it was hidden, the fact that the people who shaped history went to extraordinary lengths to make sure you never heard her real teaching, that tells you something important before we even begin. Let's start there. Most people know the story, or they think they do. She's the woman who wept, the repentant sinner, the one who dried the feet of Jesus with her hair. For centuries, that was the official version, constructed deliberately by Pope Gregory I in 591 AD, when he merged three completely separate women from the New Testament into one composite figure and labeled her a prostitute. There was no scriptural basis for that. None. It was a decision. A political, calculated decision that took the most prominent female disciple in early Christianity, a woman the texts themselves called the Apostle to the Apostles, the first witness to the resurrection, the one to whom the deepest teachings were entrusted, and reduced her to a symbol of shame and repentance. Ask yourself why. When you want to silence a teaching, you don't always burn the books first. Sometimes you discredit the teacher. You take the source of the knowledge and you attach scandal to it, weakness to it, shame to it. You make sure that anyone who comes after will approach that name with condescension rather than reverence. And for almost 14 centuries, it worked. Then, in 1945, a farmer in Upper Egypt near a town called Nag Hammadi broke open a clay jar buried in the earth and found 13 leather-bound codices, ancient texts that had been hidden sometime around the 4th century, almost certainly to protect them from destruction. What was inside those codices rewrote everything. These were Gnostic texts, suppressed texts, texts that preserved a version of early Christian spirituality so different from what we'd been told existed that scholars spent decades just processing the implications. And Mary Magdalene was everywhere in them. Not as a sinner, not as a weeping, peripheral figure, as a teacher, as someone the other disciples came to for understanding, as someone who possessed a quality of inner knowing, a direct, unmediated access to spiritual truth, that even Peter, the rock of the church, found threatening. In the texts recovered from that jar, Peter doesn't just question her. He's hostile to her. He wants her excluded. He says, essentially, that a woman shouldn't be teaching at this level. And what does Mary say back? She doesn't defend herself with emotion. She doesn't argue from authority. She says, in essence, if the teacher found me worthy, then the question isn't about me. The question is about you and what you're unwilling to see. That is not the response of a penitent sinner. That is the response of someone who knows exactly where their knowledge comes from. And that knowledge, that direct, inner, unshakable knowing, is the core of everything she taught. The Gnostics called it gnosis. Not belief, not faith in the religious sense. Direct knowing, the kind of knowing that doesn't need external permission to be true. Now here's where it gets important for everything we're about to discuss. Mary Magdalene didn't just teach about the light within. She taught about the forces that work against it. She was one of the clearest voices in the entire Gnostic tradition on the subject of what stands between a human being and their own awakening. And chief among those forces, the ones she described with precision, the the ones she essentially told her students to learn to recognize, were the Archons. This is where most spiritual content stops being useful. Because most people who talk about Archons do it in a way that keeps the concept safely abstract. Cosmic beings, interdimensional entities, forces in the sky, something out there, far away, not quite real enough to actually affect your Tuesday afternoon. Mary Magdalene wasn't talking about something far away. She was talking about what's right in front of you. The word itself comes from the Greek. Archon. It means ruler, governor, one who holds authority. Sit with that for a second, because the choice of that word, ruler, is not accidental. The Gnostic teachers who preserved and transmitted this knowledge were extraordinarily precise with language. They weren't calling these forces demons. They weren't calling them monsters. They called them rulers, governors. And that distinction matters more than most people realize, because a ruler doesn't destroy what it governs. A ruler administers it, controls it, keeps it functioning just enough to remain useful, just enough to keep producing. That's a very different kind of threat than a monster, and it's a far more accurate description of what you've actually felt operating in your life. In the Gnostic cosmology that Mary Magdalene moved within, a worldview that was not mythology in the dismissive sense, but a lived, practiced map of consciousness and its obstacles, Archons were understood as a class of created beings. Not evil in the Hollywood sense. Not red-skinned, horn-wearing, fire-breathing evil. Something arguably more disturbing than that. Something quieter. Something that wears a much more familiar face. They were described as incomplete. As beings that came into existence through a kind of spiritual error, a fracture in the process of creation, and emerged lacking the one thing that animates genuine consciousness. The pneuma, the divine breath, the living inner light that makes a being not just functional but real in the deepest sense. Awake, originating, genuinely alive from the inside out. The Archons had none of that. They came into being without it. And here is where the teaching becomes something you can actually feel in your bones, because they didn't just passively lack the light. They were drawn to it, compulsively, relentlessly, the way a cold thing is drawn toward warmth, the way a void pulls toward fullness. Not out of love, not out of genuine longing for truth, out of a kind of existential hunger that has no bottom, because no amount of extracted light can ever replace the light you were simply never given. Now I want to give you the single most important principle in this entire teaching. The one statement that, if you carry nothing else from this video, will still change how you see everything. Archons cannot create. They can only imitate. Read that again. Let it land, because it is the key to every single sign we're going to go through. It is the key to recognizing this frequency wherever it operates. It is the thing that, once you truly understand it, makes the pattern visible everywhere. Archons cannot originate anything. They cannot generate new life, new insight, new genuine wisdom. They can copy the forms of living things, take the outer structure of something real, and reproduce it. They can mimic the language of wisdom with extraordinary fluency. They can construct elaborate systems, worlds within worlds, rules within rules, layer upon layer of complexity, that look like reality but function as traps. Beautiful traps, sophisticated traps, traps that can hold a human being for years, sometimes an entire lifetime, because they were engineered specifically to look like home. The Gnostic teachers described this constructed false reality as the kenoma, the deficiency, the void that has learned to present itself as fullness. A hollow architecture built to resemble meaning so convincingly that the living light inside a human being, your pneuma, your genuine divine spark, stays confused, stays distracted, stays circling inside the constructed walls, mistaking them for the whole of existence, never finding its way back to its own source. That is the archontic function. Not destruction, containment, not burning the light out. Keeping it so busy, so confused, so caught up in the maze, that it never catches fire into what it actually is. Now I want to make the most important move of this entire section. And I want you to track with me carefully, because this is where this teaching stops being cosmology and starts being something you can use today. Right now, in the actual life you are actually living. The Gnostic teaching, and Mary Magdalene's teaching specifically, was never primarily about literal cosmic beings operating on some distant spiritual plane that you might encounter in a deep meditation or an altered state. That dimension of the teaching exists, but it was never the primary focus. The primary focus was always here. Human, relational, practical. The deepest, most usable layer of this teaching is this: The archontic frequency is a mode of consciousness, a way of being, a particular configuration of how a person relates to their own inner life and to the inner lives of the people around them. And that mode of consciousness can and does operate through human beings, not in a science fiction sense, not in a this person is secretly a reptile sense, in the most grounded, observable, real-world sense you can imagine. Here is how it happens. A person who has been sufficiently cut off from their own inner light, through trauma, through conditioning, through years of living in ways that required them to suppress their own genuine knowing, builds their entire personality, their entire survival strategy around the absence of that inner flame. They learn to function without gnosis. They build systems of getting through life that rely entirely on the external, on image, on control, on the reactions of others, on extracting from the environment what they cannot generate from within. And then, almost automatically, with no conscious intention required, they begin to function in archontic ways. They imitate rather than originate. They produce the appearance of depth without the substance. They use the language of whatever environment they're in, spiritual language in spiritual spaces, intellectual language in intellectual spaces, emotional language in emotional spaces, with a fluency that can be genuinely dazzling. But there is nothing new coming through them, nothing being genuinely created, only reflection, only mimicry, only the reproduction of forms they've observed in people who actually carry the light they themselves lack. They extract rather than generate. They feed from the emotional and spiritual energy of people around them, manufacturing the conditions, drama, crisis, need, manufactured conflict, that cause those people to pour their pneuma outward where it can be absorbed. They build mazes rather than open doors. They introduce complexity into simple situations. They create confusion precisely when clarity is approaching. They generate loops, circular dynamics, unresolvable conversations, recurring patterns, that keep the people around them perpetually expending energy without ever arriving anywhere. And this is the part that matters most for what we're about to go through. They are extraordinarily, almost supernaturally threatened by anyone in their proximity who is genuinely awakening. Because a person who is waking up is a person who is beginning to see the walls of the maze. And the maze requires you're not seeing it to function. This is what Mary Magdalene was warning about. Not monsters, not cartoon villains, not dramatic evil you could recognize from across a room. People, sometimes ordinary-looking people, sometimes charming people, sometimes people with impressive spiritual credentials, sometimes people you love deeply, people you've known for years, people you've shared your most sacred inner experiences with. Sometimes the person who has been most consistently working against your consciousness is the last person you would have ever suspected of it. Because the archontic frequency is not always loud. It's not always obvious. It is, by its very nature, a frequency of imitation. And it imitates caring, imitates wisdom, imitates love, with a precision that can fool even the most discerning person for longer than feels comfortable to admit. I've sat with this teaching for a long time, longer than most things I've studied. And I'll be honest with you, when it first really landed, it didn't feel liberating. It felt uncomfortable. It felt like a door opening onto a room I'd been carefully avoiding. Because absorbing this teaching meant looking at certain relationships in my life and asking a question I had been finding every possible reason not to ask. Not, is this person bad? That's the wrong question. That question leads nowhere useful. It turns into judgment or defensiveness or the kind of moral sorting that spiritually mature people rightly resist. The real question, the one Mary Magdalene's teaching demands, is this. Is this person right now in this dynamic functioning as a force that is working against my consciousness? Against my awakening? Against the activation of my own inner knowing? Those are completely different questions. The first one is about their character. The second one is about the function of the relationship. And the function is what matters. A person doesn't have to be bad to be functioning in a way that suppresses your light. They can be wounded. They can be unaware. They can genuinely believe they love you. All of that can be true. And simultaneously, the function of their presence in your life, if you look at it honestly, without flinching, can be the consistent dimming of your pneuma. That is what Mary Magdalene was asking her students to see, not with judgment, with clarity. She mapped it. She gave it structure. She left behind 5 signs, specific, recognizable, precise enough to be useful in real relationships in the real world. And now we're going to go through them one by one. Pay attention. Because at least one of these is going to describe something you have been living in. And the moment you recognize it clearly, really clearly, without the fog, something is going to shift. That shift is the beginning of everything. I want you to picture something. It's an ordinary evening. Nothing dramatic. You're sitting with someone you've known for years, maybe a close friend, maybe a spiritual mentor, someone who's been in your life through your real growth. And you're telling them something that matters to you. Something you've just understood. A realization that came to you quietly, the way the real ones always do, not in a rush or a performance, but like a light slowly filling a room. You're trying to put it into words. You're saying something like, I think I finally understand why I kept repeating that pattern. I think it was because, and they interrupt you. Not rudely, gently actually, with a little smile. And they say something like, that's interesting, but are you sure you're not just rationalizing? I mean, you've thought you understood this before. Or maybe it's, I've noticed you've been a little disconnected lately. Are you sure you're grounded enough to be having these kinds of realizations? Or maybe it's even softer than that, just a slight pause, a raised eyebrow, a small sound that carries the weight of doubt. And you feel it immediately. That deflation. That sudden uncertainty about something you were completely certain of 2 seconds ago. You backtrack. You qualify. You make your own realization smaller so that the conversation can continue comfortably. Later, driving home, you barely remember what you were going to say. You just feel tired. Here's what I want you to understand about that moment. And this is the teaching of Mary Magdalene speaking directly. What happened in that room was not an accident. It was not your friend being thoughtless. What happened was that your gnosis, your direct inner knowing, surfaced. And something in that room could not allow it to stand. Something needed it questioned, doubted, reduced. Because a person living in genuine inner knowing is ungovernable. And ungovernable people cannot be kept in mazes. That moment, that small, ordinary, devastating moment, is what the first sign looks like from the inside. Sign 1. They attack your inner knowing. Let me be precise about what gnosis actually is, because this matters. Gnosis is not belief. It is not intellectual understanding. It is not the accumulation of spiritual information. Gnosis is direct perception, the capacity to know something true about yourself or reality from the inside, without needing external authority to confirm it. It's the moment you realize you've been living a lie, not because someone told you, but because something in you simply saw it. It's the moment a meditation goes somewhere real, not pleasant, not comfortable, but real. It's the quiet recognition of your own nature that doesn't argue or perform, it just knows. Mary Magdalene, in the Gnostic understanding, was considered a supreme embodiment of this capacity. The teaching attributed to her, the fragments that survived the burning, again and again return to this theme, that the inner knowing is the path. Not the path supplemented by outer authority. The path itself, complete, sovereign, yours. And this is exactly why the first sign of an archontic person operating in your life is an attack on that knowing. Not always an obvious attack. In fact, the more sophisticated the archontic presence, the more subtle and elegant the attack. It sounds like wisdom. That's the first thing to understand. It sounds like someone helping you think more clearly. It sounds like a friend who loves you enough to play devil's advocate. It sounds like a spiritual teacher being rigorous and careful. But there is a difference, a fundamental, essential difference, between someone who helps you deepen and clarify your own knowing and someone who systematically introduces doubt into every realization you have. The person helping you deepen your knowing will ask questions that open things further. Tell me more about that. What does that feel like in your body? How does that connect to what you experienced last year? Their questions move toward the center of your insight. They make it more real, more grounded, more yours. The archontic person asks questions that move away from center. But how do you know that's not just your ego? Have you considered that you might be spiritually bypassing? I just want to make sure you're being discerning. The questions sound careful. They sound even wise. But notice what they do. Every single one of them puts you in a position of defending your own direct experience. Every single one of them installs a judge between you and your own perception. Irenaeus of Lyon, a 2nd century bishop who was one of the most aggressive opponents of Gnostic teaching, which is interesting in itself, wrote extensively about Gnostic communities, and even in his hostility, he preserved something important. He described Gnostics as people who trusted their own inner experience above external religious authority. He presented this as the problem. But if you read it with different eyes, what he was actually describing was people who had access to gnosis that external systems could not control. Think about that in terms of your own life. The people in your life who have most consistently undermined your inner knowing, who have most consistently made you doubt your perceptions, your realizations, your sense of what's real? Have they done that in the service of your freedom? Has doubting yourself made you more sovereign, more alive, more genuinely you? Or has it made you more dependent, more confused, more in need of their guidance? That's the question. And I want to say something from my own conviction here, because I feel strongly about this. The spiritual world is full of this particular archontic behavior right now. Full of it. Teachers who've built entire methodologies around the idea that your direct experience cannot be trusted. Frameworks that tell you your feelings are biased, your perceptions are conditioned, your knowing is ego. And there's just enough truth in that. We do have biases, our conditioning is real, that it works as a trap. A little true, mostly imprisoning. Mary Magdalene's answer to this was not to abandon discernment. It was to locate discernment inside the self rather than surrender it to an external authority. Real discernment strengthens your knowing. It doesn't replace your knowing with someone else's. If there is a person in your life who, over time, has made you trust yourself less, pay attention. That is the first sign. Sign 2, they keep you locked in endless loops. There's a concept at the heart of Gnostic cosmology that most modern spiritual content completely glosses over, and I think it's one of the most practically useful ideas in this entire tradition. The Gnostics described the material world, not as evil, exactly, but as a constructed system. A framework built by the demiurge, which in Gnostic understanding is a kind of false creator, a being that fashioned the visible world without full access to the divine source. And the demiurge didn't build this world as a home. It built it as a system of circles, loop spheres nested within spheres. The Gnostic texts describe 7 layers of this constructed reality, each governed by an archon, and each one is essentially a barrier, a beautiful, intricate, seemingly meaningful barrier between the human soul and its return to the divine light. Now here's what I want you to do with that. I want you to forget, for a moment, the cosmological framework and ask yourself this question. Do you know anyone who is a builder of loops? Not a builder of forward movement. Not someone whose presence in your life creates genuine development and growth. A builder of loops. Someone whose conversations always somehow circle back to the same point. Someone whose advice, however intelligent it sounds, always leaves you needing more advice. Someone around whom the same problems recur, not because of bad luck or coincidence, but because something in the dynamic itself is generating those problems. Someone who creates complexity everywhere they go, because that is the human expression of this archontic function. The Gnostics called it the demiurgic impulse, the drive to build systems not for liberation but for containment. And in human form, it manifests as a very specific kind of person. A person who is extraordinarily good at making simple things complicated. A person who introduces chaos precisely when you're on the verge of clarity. A person whose help always somehow results in you being more tangled, not less. I want to be nuanced here, because I think this is a sign that can easily be misread. Life is genuinely complex sometimes. Real relationships go through real difficulty. People we love struggle, and that struggle affects us. None of that is archontic. The difference, and this is crucial, is whether the complexity is generative or consumptive. Generative complexity moves. It has direction. Even when it's painful, there's a sense of something being worked through, something being built, something real being approached. Consumptive complexity just circles. It uses the same language, visits the same wounds, asks the same questions, reaches the same dead ends, and then resets and starts again. If you've been in a relationship, any kind of relationship, romantic, friendship, spiritual mentorship, family, that has been stuck in the same loop for years, and you've done your own work, and you've grown, and still the loop persists, the loop doesn't come from you. Let me say that again, because I think it's something a lot of spiritually aware people need to hear. If you have done genuine inner work, real work, not performance, not spiritual collecting, and a particular relationship still reliably produces the same circular confusion, the same unresolvable dynamic, the same you explaining yourself to no effect conversations, the loop is not a reflection of your incompleteness. The loop is being maintained. In the Nag Hammadi texts, the Archons are described not just as powerful, but as specifically skilled at one thing, making their constructed reality look like the only reality, making the maze look like the map, making the circle look like a path. This is not accidental. It is the core function of the archontic presence. And when a human being is carrying that frequency, they become extraordinarily skilled at exactly this, making you feel that you haven't found the way out yet, that you need to keep going around again, that maybe this time the circle will lead somewhere. It won't. The teaching of Mary Magdalene here is stark, and it is clear. She taught that the Archons hold their power through confusion, through what the Gnostic texts call agnoia, unknowing, the deliberate manufacturing of spiritual fog. And the way through that fog is not more analysis. It's not going around the loop one more time with better intentions. It's the act of seeing the loop for what it is. Recognition. That's the tool. The moment you see the loop clearly, without judgment, without drama, without needing to make the other person into a villain, the loop loses its power over you. You can still be in the relationship. You can still love the person. But you stop putting your inner growth at the mercy of something that was never designed to support it. Think about where you are in your life right now. Think about the situations that seem to never quite resolve. Think about the conversations that replay. Think about the patterns that persist no matter how much you've grown around them. One of those might be a maze, and someone might be tending it. Sign 3, they harvest your emotional energy. This is the sign most people have felt, but few have been able to name clearly. So I'm going to be precise here, because precision matters. In the Gnostic tradition, the divine spark within a human being, the piece of genuine light from the source, the part of you that existed before this body and will exist after it, was called pneuma, spiritual breath, living light. And this wasn't a metaphor in the way we casually use spiritual metaphors today. The Gnostic understanding was that pneuma is a real substance of consciousness, that it is what animates genuine knowing and genuine love, and that this is the critical part, something that can be depleted. Not destroyed, but depleted, drained, suppressed into dormancy. And the Gnostic cosmology is explicit about this. The archontic function, the thing Archons do, is the harvesting of pneuma. They cannot generate it themselves. They cannot create the light they lack, but they can position themselves around beings who have it, and they can extract it. Through drama, through manufactured need, through emotional crisis that is somehow always perfectly timed to interrupt your growth. Through the specific kind of chaos that makes you pour out your energy, your attention, your care, your life force, into a situation that never actually improves, never actually heals, just keeps needing more. Now bring this down to the human level. You know people who generate emotional weather, constant emotional weather. And I want to be careful here, because genuine human pain is real, and people in genuine crisis deserve care and presence. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something that has a specific signature, something that moves. Watch this. When you are in a period of genuine expansion, when something is opening in you, when your practice is deepening, when your clarity is sharpening, when you're getting closer to something real about yourself, does a particular person in your life tend to have a crisis? Does the drama somehow spike exactly when your light is brightest? Does the need get loudest precisely when you're in a quiet, growing place? That is not coincidence. The archontic frequency in a person is, at its core, an unconscious tracking system for pneuma. These people find those who carry a lot of inner light. They don't necessarily do this consciously. Many of them have no idea they're doing it, but they do it with an almost supernatural consistency. They appear in the lives of the most awake, most caring, most spiritually developed people, and they position themselves at the point of maximum extraction. And here's what makes this sign so difficult to act on. They make you feel responsible for their pain. They construct, usually without conscious intention, a dynamic where your withdrawing your energy feels like abandonment, where setting a boundary feels like cruelty, where protecting your pneuma feels like being unspiritual, unloving, unawakened. They weaponize your compassion, not usually with malice, but with a precision that malice couldn't improve on. Elaine Pagels, a scholar of religion at Princeton University who has spent decades studying Gnostic texts and is probably the most accessible guide we have into this territory, wrote about how the Gnostic communities understood the difference between psychic people and pneumatic people. Psychic meaning those who operated from the level of the soul and emotion. Pneumatic meaning those who carried the living spark at a higher level of activation. And she noted that the early Gnostic understanding was that these two types of people would naturally create a specific dynamic, where the pneumatic becomes a source for the psychic to draw from. Mary Magdalene's teaching doesn't say to stop caring. It doesn't say to become cold or closed. It says to develop the discernment to know the difference between giving from fullness and being drained from depletion. Between genuine compassion, which flows from abundance and doesn't diminish you, and the kind of giving that leaves you hollow, confused, and somehow feeling guilty for not having given more. Here is the question I want you to sit with. Not answer quickly, really sit with it. Is there a person in your life whose problems you have been holding for years? Whose crises you have responded to again and again with your full heart? And are they better? Is the situation actually improving? Or are you just more tired, and the situation is exactly the same? Because genuine care, genuine love that is received and integrated, it changes things. It moves. It heals. It grows. If your energy is going out and nothing is changing, you need to ask yourself what it's actually feeding. That is the third sign. And it is the one, in my experience, that the most compassionate people are most vulnerable to. Because your caring is real. Your love is real. The archontic frequency doesn't create the caring. It just positions itself to receive it indefinitely, without return, without change. Know this. Protect your light. Not out of fear. Out of wisdom. Sign 4. They wear spiritual masks. I told you this one was coming, and I want you to understand why I think it's the most dangerous of all 5 signs. Because the first 3 signs, attacking your inner knowing, building loops, harvesting your energy, all of those can be found in non-spiritual contexts. You can find them in toxic workplaces, in dysfunctional families, in ordinary unhealthy relationships. And because they show up in ordinary life, most people have at least some framework for recognizing them over time. But this 4th sign is specific to the spiritual world. And it's specific to people who are awake, or getting awake, which means it's specific to you. In the Gnostic texts, there is a concept called the antimamen pneuma, the counterfeit spirit, the imitation of the divine breath. And the description of it in the texts is unsettling precisely because of how accurate it is. The counterfeit spirit doesn't look dark. It doesn't announce itself as opposition. It speaks the language of light. It uses the vocabulary of wisdom. It performs all the external markers of spiritual development with extraordinary fluency, because it has been studying those markers for a very long time. The archontic teaching in the Gnostic tradition includes this. Archons are watchers. They observe consciousness. They see what genuine spiritual transmission looks like, what it sounds like, how it moves, what it produces in the people who receive it. And they can replicate the appearance of all of it. They can be more convincing than the real thing in the short term, because they are not constrained by the limitations of genuine truth. Truth is specific. It has edges. It asks things of you. Imitation can be anything you need it to be. In human form, this manifests as a very particular kind of person. The spiritual teacher who is extraordinary with language, beautiful, resonant language, but whose students, over time, don't actually get more free. They get more dependent. The healer who creates a dynamic where you always need another healing. The mentor who knows all the right words about sovereignty and growth, but somehow your sovereignty never actually increases around them. The community leader whose teachings are about liberation, but whose actual community becomes more insular, more defined by loyalty to them, more separate from the outside world. The one Mary Magdalene's teaching points to with absolute clarity, is this. Genuine spiritual transmission increases your autonomy. Every time, without exception. A real teacher, a real mentor, a real presence of light in your life. They make you more yourself, more capable of thinking for yourself, more able to access your own gnosis, more free over time, not less. The relationship moves toward your independence, not away from it. A genuinely awake teacher is actively working toward the day you don't need them. They're pointing at the moon, knowing that the moment you see the moon clearly, you won't be looking at their finger anymore, and they're glad about that. Archontic imitation in human form does the opposite. It moves, always, toward your dependence. It may talk about your liberation constantly, but watch the direction of actual movement. Are you freer in your thinking than you were a year ago? More trusting of your own inner knowing? More capable of navigating spiritual territory without this person's input? Or have you slowly, over time, outsourced more and more of your spiritual discernment to them? I need to say this clearly because I feel the weight of it. The spiritual community is not a safe zone from this. I think, and this is my honest opinion, not a popular one, the spiritual community may actually be the primary operating territory for this particular archontic sign. Because people who are seeking genuine awakening, people who are open, who are trusting their inner experiences, who have dismantled the old structures of their conditioning, and are genuinely looking for something real, those people are exactly the ones the counterfeit spirit can most effectively reach. Your openness is a gift. It is also a vulnerability. Not because being open is wrong, it's exactly right, but because the archontic frequency understands openness and knows how to enter through it. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and depth psychologist who spent his career mapping the interior world of the human psyche, who was arguably the most important Western thinker to seriously engage with Gnostic material in the modern era, described something he called the shadow of the spiritual teacher. The idea that people who take on the role of spiritual authority accumulate a specific kind of shadow, one that can become enormously powerful and enormously destructive precisely because it hides behind the genuine light that drew people to them in the first place. Mary Magdalene would not have found Jung's language surprising. She was talking about this 2,000 years before him. The protection here is not cynicism. Cynicism would just be the counterswing, closing to everything because something was fake. The protection is the specific question. Not does this feel good? Not does this person's teaching resonate? But am I more free? Am I more sovereign? Do I trust my own knowing more than I did? Is this transmission pointing me toward my own light or toward this person's light? Ask that question, and then believe the answer your honest knowing gives you. Sign 5, they punish your awakening. This is the final sign. And if the others have been building something in you as we've moved through them, a recognition, a slowly sharpening sense of yes, I know exactly what this is pointing at, then this one is going to land. Because this one is the clearest, the most unambiguous, the one that, once you see it, you cannot unsee. Here is what it looks like. You grow. You genuinely, actually grow. You shed something that was weighing you down. You step into something that is more fully yourself. You expand in some real and undeniable way. And a specific person in your life reacts to that growth with something that doesn't look like joy. It might look like withdrawal, or cold silence, or suddenly finding fault with you in ways they never did before, or manufacturing conflict around things that were never issues, or, and this is the subtle version, subtly repositioning you in the relationship so that your growth somehow becomes a problem. You become too much, or not enough, or different in a way that is somehow wrong. And you feel it, even if you can't name it. That specific chill that comes when your expansion is met with contraction, when your clarity is met with hostility, when your becoming is treated as a betrayal. Here's what Mary Magdalene's teaching says about this moment. It says it's not personal. I know that sounds almost too simple given how painful this experience is, but I mean it in the most precise Gnostic sense. The Archontic frequency does not punish your awakening because it has a personal grievance with you. It punishes your awakening because awakening, genuine awakening, the increasing activation of the pneuma within you, is a functional threat to anything that depends on your unconsciousness. Let me put this even more simply. If you were a lock and someone carried the key, the lock is not angry. It's just a lock. It does what locks do. It resists the opening. The Archontic frequency in a person is like a lock that has learned to speak and move and present itself as someone who cares about you. But the moment you put the key in, the moment your light activates in their presence, the resistance begins. Automatically, functionally, not personally. This is actually one of the most liberating things in this entire teaching, once you really absorb it. Because so many awakening people have spent enormous energy trying to understand what they did wrong when someone who claimed to love them responded to their growth with punishment. Trying to make it make sense. Trying to get back to whatever they were before the growth so the relationship could be stable again. You didn't do anything wrong. You did exactly right. You grew. You woke up more. You became more you. And something that needed you to be less you responded accordingly. The Gnostic concept of kenoma, the void, the deficiency, describes a state of being that is fundamentally organized around the absence of divine light. And the kenoma, in the Gnostic understanding, doesn't just passively lack the light. It actively moves against it, not from evil intention, but from its own essential nature, the way a cold room doesn't intend to cool the warm air. It just does, because that's what cold does in the presence of warmth. When a human being has become strongly organized around the Archontic frequency, when the kenoma has become the dominant mode of their being, your awakening is not something they can witness neutrally. It disturbs them. It agitates something, and that agitation comes out as punishment. Elaine Pagels, in her research into the Nag Hammadi community, noted that one of the consistent themes in Gnostic persecution, and they were persecuted brutally by the institutional church, was that the Gnostics attracted hostility not in proportion to any harm they were causing, but in proportion to how freely they were living within their own inner knowing. The more awake they became, the more threatened the surrounding system became. She notes that this pattern was so consistent that the Gnostics began to understand persecution itself as a kind of confirmation, not of their righteousness, but of their direction. Mary Magdalene taught her students to understand this dynamic clearly. Not to be arrogant about it. There's nothing to be arrogant about when someone punishes your growth. It's painful, not victorious. But to understand it, so that you stop interpreting their punishment as truth about you. You stop shrinking. You stop going back. You stop believing that if you could just explain your growth clearly enough, they would understand and celebrate it. They won't. Not while they're operating in this frequency. Here's the specific pattern to watch for across all your relationships. Not just dramatic punishment. The subtle version, because the subtle version is more common and more confusing. Watch what happens to the relationship's equilibrium when you become more. When you speak more clearly. When you become more confident in your own knowing. When you make a decision from your own authority rather than seeking their approval. When you step into something new that has nothing to do with them. Does the person expand to celebrate that? Or does something tighten? Do they find a way to diminish the thing you're proud of? Do they become suddenly busy, suddenly distant, suddenly critical, specifically at the moments when you're most alight? Do they somehow always find the exact thing to say that puts a small shadow on your brightest moments? That's not coincidence. That's function. That is the fifth sign. And it is, in my honest opinion, the most clarifying of all five. Because the first four signs can sometimes have innocent explanations. Sometimes people really are just confused, really are just going through their own process, really are just carrying wounds they're working through. I always want to hold that complexity. I don't want to turn this teaching into a paranoid framework where everyone is an enemy. But this fifth sign is clarifying precisely because it is directional. It specifically activates around your growth. Not around difficulty, not around pain, around your light. A person who reliably contracts around your expansion, who reliably finds something wrong with your becoming, that tells you something essential about what function they're serving in your life. And you have to decide what to do with that information. Let's stop here for a moment, because you've just moved through 5 signs. 5 clear, specific, sometimes uncomfortable mirrors held up against the relationships and dynamics in your life. And if this teaching has done what it's supposed to do, something in you has shifted. Something has been named that was previously just a feeling, a pressure, a quiet wrongness you couldn't quite locate. And now comes the part where a lot of spiritual content fails you. Because most content that builds this kind of framework, here are the signs, here are the red flags, here's what's draining you, ends in one of 2 places. Either it ends in fear, a low-grade spiritual paranoia, where you start seeing archontic behavior everywhere, where every difficult person becomes an energy vampire, where your response to the teaching is to contract, to close, to build increasingly elaborate defenses around yourself. Or it ends in aggression. Cut them off. Protect your energy at all costs. Eliminate anyone who doesn't match your frequency. A kind of spiritual self-preservation that looks like wisdom, but is actually just a more sophisticated form of the same disconnection the teaching was trying to address. Mary Magdalene's teaching ends in neither of those places. Not even close. What she actually pointed toward is something far more demanding than avoidance, far more powerful than walls, and far more rooted in genuine spiritual maturity than any strategy of elimination. And I want to take you through it carefully because this part, the response, the actual practice, is where this teaching becomes something you can live, not just something you understand. The first thing, the ground of everything else. Recognition itself is the protection. I want you to really sit with that. Not recognition as the first step in a plan. Not recognition as the trigger for a strategy. Recognition itself. The clear seeing, in its own right, as the thing that changes everything. Here is why this is true at the deepest level of the Gnostic teaching. The archontic forces, in whatever form they operate, cosmic or human, hold their power through one thing and one thing only. Agnoia, unknowing, confusion. The specific fog that settles over a person's consciousness when they cannot see clearly what is actually happening to them. The construction of the false reality, the maze, the loop, the counterfeit spiritual mask, none of it works in full light. All of it depends, entirely, on your not seeing it for what it is. This is not a metaphor. This is the actual mechanics of the teaching. The moment genuine gnosis occurs, the moment you look at the loop and see it as a loop, look at the mask and see it as a mask, look at the punishment and understand it as a functional response to your light rather than a truth about your worth, the power relationship changes completely. Not because you've done anything external, Not because you've had a confrontation or made a decision or executed a plan. Because the light has come on. And things that were built to function in darkness simply cannot maintain themselves the same way once the room is lit. This is why Mary Magdalene placed inner knowing, gnosis, not at the end of the spiritual path, not as the reward for years of practice, but at the absolute living center of every moment. The moment-to-moment practice of seeing clearly, of staying genuinely present to what is actually happening rather than what you're being told is happening, of trusting your own direct perception over anyone else's narration of your experience. The protection isn't a technique, it's a state of being, and you access it by cultivating the gnosis that was always already yours. The second thing she pointed toward, and I think this might be the most practically useful teaching in the entire Gnostic tradition, for where most awakening people actually are right now, is the protection and active cultivation of your pneuma, your living inner light, your life force, the divine breath within you that the archontic frequency is specifically designed to harvest. And here is where I need to challenge something that a lot of spiritually developed people have been taught, by their culture, by their religious background, by their own deep compassion, as a virtue. The idea that giving from emptiness is noble, that running your reserves to zero in service of someone else's need is what love looks like, that the more you sacrifice yourself, the more spiritually developed you must be, that saying "I have nothing left to give right now" is a form of failure, of selfishness, of spiritual immaturity. Mary Magdalene's teaching says the direct opposite of this, and says it without apology. Giving from depletion doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't serve the person you're giving to, because what they're receiving isn't your genuine light, it's the last burning scraps of a fire that's going out. And it doesn't serve you, obviously. But more than that, giving from depletion actively feeds the archontic dynamic. Because the archontic frequency doesn't just want your energy. It wants the specific energy of a person who has overridden their own inner signals to keep giving past empty. That act of self-abandonment, the choice to ignore what your own pneuma is telling you in order to meet an external demand, is itself a form of gnosis suppression. You are actively choosing not to hear your own inner knowing. And every time you do that, the pathway to that knowing gets a little more overgrown. The practice she pointed toward is different. It is staying in sufficient connection with your own inner light that everything you offer, to anyone, in any relationship, comes from genuine fullness. And when you begin to feel the hollow pull of depletion starting, when the giving begins to cost you more than you're generating, that feeling is not a signal to push through. That feeling is the signal. Full stop. The signal to stop, to return to yourself, to restore the pneuma before it goes out. How? Through what the Gnostic tradition points toward again and again. Silence. Stillness. Solitude that is not isolation, but genuine return to the self. The practices that bring you back into direct, unmediated contact with your own inner knowing, without an external voice narrating it, without another person's need shaping it, without the performance of spiritual development clouding it. Just you and the direct experience of your own consciousness. These practices are not luxuries. In the Gnostic understanding, they are the maintenance of the very thing the archontic frequency is trying to consume. Every moment you spend in genuine inner stillness is a moment of restoration. Every moment you access your own knowing directly, without giving it away before you've even fully received it, is a moment of pneuma replenishment. This is not selfishness. This is the foundation without which genuine service to anyone becomes impossible. The third thing, and this one will require something from you, a real quality of interior courage, is refusing to feed the loop. Now I want to be precise here, because this is not what it might first sound like. Refusing to feed the loop is not cutting people off. It's not building walls. It's not the spiritual version of ghosting everyone who ever made you uncomfortable. It is something far more sophisticated and far more difficult than any of those things. It means developing the capacity to be genuinely present in a relationship, fully there, fully caring, fully yourself, without surrendering your consciousness to the circular pattern the other person is generating. It means being able to recognize in real time when the loop is beginning to spin up, when the conversation is entering the familiar territory that goes nowhere, when the dynamic is starting its familiar rotation, and choosing from a place of clarity rather than reactivity not to enter it. You can love someone completely and still refuse the loop. Those two things are not in conflict. In fact, I'd argue that refusing the loop is one of the most genuinely loving things you can do. Because participating in the loop, going around it one more time with more patience, more explanation, more energy, more of yourself, doesn't help the person generating it. It just confirms that the loop works, that it produces the result it was built to produce. Your refusal, offered without hostility, without coldness, without the drama of a confrontation, is actually the only response that has any chance of introducing something genuinely new into the dynamic. This is hard. The loop is constructed specifically to make refusal feel wrong. It makes not entering feel like abandonment, like you're the one being cruel, being withholding, failing in your love. That guilt is part of the architecture. It's one of the walls of the maze. And seeing it as such clearly without flinching is part of what the practice asks of you. Now, something I need to say about the people carrying this archontic frequency, something I feel strongly about, and something I think is too rarely said in content like this. They are not your enemies. I mean that with complete precision, not as a soft disclaimer, not as a way of making this teaching feel safer or more palatable. I mean it as a genuine spiritual position rooted in the deepest layer of what Mary Magdalene actually taught. The Gnostic understanding of the archontic frequency is not, at its core, a teaching about evil people to be feared and fled from. It is a teaching about a mode of consciousness, a specific, recognizable configuration of being that has become severed from its own divine source. And the person living inside that severed state is not a monster. There's someone living in the kenoma, in the void, in the genuine, painful, constant absence of the very light they are compulsively trying to extract from others. That is not a comfortable existence. That is not a powerful existence, despite how much power such people can appear to wield. That is a form of suffering, an ongoing, hollow, never quite satisfied hunger that no amount of extracted light will ever genuinely fill. You don't owe them your light. That is clear and it is final. But understanding their condition, really understanding it, not as an excuse for harm, but as a genuine compassionate seeing of what is actually happening in them, makes it possible for you to disengage without hatred, without fear, without the kind of spiritual superiority that would just be a different form of contracted consciousness, without making them into the villain of your story, which would only give them a starring role in your inner world long after the relationship itself has ended. Mary Magdalene's teaching was ultimately about sovereignty, not warfare, about becoming so genuinely yourself, so fully alive in your own knowing, so deeply rooted in your own pneuma, that the archontic frequency, in whatever form it approaches, simply cannot find a place to land in you. Not because you've armored yourself against it, because you are too fully, completely, unambiguously there to be displaced. A light that is fully on cannot be convinced it is dark. That's the whole teaching in one sentence. When I first let this teaching land, not intellectually, not as interesting Gnostic philosophy, but actually in the places in my life where it applied, it didn't make everything immediately easier. Some of it got harder first. Some relationships found a new footing only after going through a period of genuine difficulty. But what ended, immediately, permanently, was the confusion. And I want you to understand how much the confusion had been costing me. More than the pain, more than the difficult dynamics themselves, the not knowing what was actually happening, the constant second-guessing of my own perceptions, the exhaustion of trying to make sense of something that had been carefully constructed not to make sense. The naming ended all of that, and when the confusion lifted, what remained was not cynicism, not guardedness, not the cold efficiency of someone who has learned to trust no one. What remained was clarity. And from clarity, from that clean, steady, genuinely seeing place, everything else became possible. That is what Gnosis does. It doesn't promise ease. It delivers clarity. And clarity, in Mary Magdalene's teaching, is not the destination. It is where everything real begins. We've come a long way in this video. And I want to close with the question I think deserves a real answer. Why was this suppressed? Not why in the simple sense. We know the historical mechanism. The Nag Hammadi texts were buried around the 4th century, almost certainly to protect them from destruction by the Orthodox Church, which was, in that period, actively eliminating theological diversity and consolidating power. We know that Pope Gregory I deliberately misrepresented Mary Magdalene in 591 AD. We know that Gnostic communities were persecuted. We know the history. But I'm asking a different question. I'm asking, what is it specifically about this teaching that required such systematic suppression? Because books get suppressed for lots of reasons: political threat, theological deviation, simple inconvenience. But the specific effort that went into erasing Mary Magdalene's particular teaching, the precision of the attack on her credibility, the care taken to ensure that the tool she was most identified with, the direct inner knowing of the individual, was discredited and made subservient to external authority. That level of systematic effort requires a specific explanation. Here is my honest belief, and you can take it or leave it. A teaching that gives every individual direct, sovereign access to their own divine knowing. That says you don't need an intermediary, you don't need an institution, you don't need an external authority to confirm your own inner experience as valid. That teaching is not threatening to spirituality. It is threatening to systems of control. The specific teaching that says recognize the forces that work against your consciousness, name them, see them clearly, refuse to feed them. That teaching, in the hands of large numbers of genuinely awake people, makes the construction and maintenance of any system that depends on those people's unconsciousness essentially impossible. You can't build a maze for someone who can see the walls. The suppression of Mary Magdalene's teaching wasn't primarily about theology. It was about function, a humanity that knows how to recognize the archontic frequency, that has a clear map of what consciousness suppression looks like when it's operating through institutions, through authority figures, through the very structures of organized power. A humanity with that map is fundamentally ungovernable by systems that require unconsciousness to function. And I think about that every time someone asks me why this kind of teaching feels so urgent right now. Not because the world is ending, not because we're in some uniquely dark time, but because we're in a time of genuine awakening. More people are genuinely waking up to their own inner knowing right now than at any point in living memory, and the archontic response to that is proportional. The loops are getting more elaborate. The masks are getting more sophisticated. The attacks on inner knowing are coming from more directions at once. You needed this map, not to be afraid, not to see enemies everywhere, but to be able to look at the forces actually operating in your life with clear, steady eyes and say, I see you. I know what you are. I know what you're doing. And I am not confused about it anymore. That is Mary Magdalene's gift to you. 2,000 years later, still intact, still precise, still exactly as needed as the day it was first spoken. So let me bring this home. Let me tell you what I want you to actually take from this. You came into this video with a feeling. That feeling, the sense of something being not quite right in certain relationships, certain spaces, certain dynamics, that feeling was not imagination. It was not oversensitivity. It was not spiritual ego or paranoia. It was your gnosis working. It was your inner knowing doing exactly what it was built to do, perceiving accurately, reaching for a framework that would let it finally make sense of what it was seeing. You now have that framework. 5 signs. Not presented to you as abstract spiritual theory, but as something you can hold up against your actual lived experience and test in real time. The first sign, they attack your inner knowing. They make you doubt your own direct perception. Every realization you have passes through their doubt first. The second sign, they build loops. The same conversations, the same dynamics, the same unresolvable cycles that use your energy and return nothing. The third sign, they harvest your emotional energy. They appear most dramatically when your light is brightest, and what you pour out never produces genuine change. The fourth sign, they wear spiritual masks, the most sophisticated and the most dangerous. They speak the language of light, but real light increases your freedom. Counterfeit light always moves toward your dependence. The fifth sign, they punish your awakening. Your growth, your expansion, your genuine becoming. In their presence, these produce not celebration but contraction, not love but punishment, not warmth but cold. And the response, the one Mary Magdalene actually pointed toward, is not warfare. It is sovereignty. Cultivate your gnosis. Protect your pneuma. Refuse the loop. See clearly. Stay fully present to your own inner knowing. And trust, genuinely, deeply trust, that your light is not only yours. It is connected to the source itself, and no archontic frequency, operating through any person or any system, can touch that connection if you stay awake to it. Here is the last thing I want to say. Mary Magdalene survived. Her teaching survived. Hidden in a jar in the desert for 16 centuries, but it survived. And I don't think that's small. I think the fact that this particular teaching, this specific map of the forces that work against consciousness, made it through to you today in this form, in this moment of your journey, is not an accident. The light finds its way. It always has. And now you know what to do with it. I need to say something directly. YouTube has officially demonetized this channel. And if you understood everything we just covered, you already know why. The archontic system does not tolerate knowledge that breaks its maze open. It starves what it cannot silence. I refuse to stop. Instead, I am going deeper. But I cannot fight them alone. I need your support to keep the esoteric Jesus alive. If these teachings landed somewhere real in you, click the link in the description and join me on Patreon. You'll instantly unlock unfiltered esoteric member-only videos, exclusive audio podcasts, and the forbidden teachings this platform will never allow me to publish here. Most people will feel this, close the tab, and walk straight back into the loop. The Archons are counting on that. Don't give them the satisfaction.